Hey, and welcome back. And today I'm joined with the lovely Mike.
Hello.
So a little intro to sort of Mike. Obviously, you are based at PAG and you're a sports therapist.
I am.
There's so many different ways that I feel like you can describe your job. When I say to people, I'm like sports masseuse, sports therapist, my massage guy. I was like, how do you want to go? So that is what you do. Now, how long have you been doing that for?
So I went to uni for 3 years and I used to PT before uni, but I've been doing it for, be coming up 2 years now, pretty much on and off.
So did you kind of just take that route a little bit down after the PT side of things?
Yeah, pretty much. I think I kind of was PTing and working kind of through a gym and enjoying my training, but I quite liked PTing, but I kind of picked up an injury, which I'll speak about later, kind of how I got into it. But kind of fell in love with the process of kind of getting diagnosed with an injury, rehabbing it, and just that whole process of kind of going through it was quite interesting to me. And I had like a good anatomy knowledge kinda at the time.
Yeah. I mean, so did you do PT stuff through your uni?
Yeah.
Probably a much better course than some of the ones that you can get online. So most likely what I'd done.
Yeah, I got the best of both worlds really, because before uni, I was working for a gym and I was kind of doing 3 hours. And those of you listening who have been in that situation know it's a little bit ropey, but it's a bit of a trade. You work for free and kind of get your PT qualifications in a bit of an exchange. But the quality of the course was a little bit ropey. And only going through uni, I realise that now,
Yeah, and I think it's always like, it's really hard with like what they kind of tell you. Like you don't really learn until you're out of it. It is literally just like a bit of paper being like, I've got it and I can do it. And that is what, obviously, legally, I can in theory do. But it's, some of the information on these courses are questionable. But I guess, obviously, how we learn the things that we do and the experiences that we have, by the sounds of
100%.
it, do shape us to kind of, I guess, take that initiative to know what route we want to kind of go down.
Yeah, sure. It's one of those things as well, there's so many different governing bodies as well. And it's kind of, I'll touch upon it with sports massage and sports therapy as a whole. That's kind of the whole joke of like, what are you? And it's like, if you call me the massage guy, I'll get upset. No? There's so many different governing bodies and it's just crazy.
And so many, I guess, misconceptions, which again, we'll probably get into,
of course.
of sort of how people view that side of things. And obviously you've got different avenues and the sort of chiropractic route and all sorts as well. But obviously it's like an absolute minefield with how you can delve into sort of, I guess, what you do in more specifics. So when you sort of said about getting into it, what was the injury?
So, there's been a few.
Because you've come from a rugby background, right?
Yeah. So I always played rugby as a kid. Didn't really touch rugby when I was at school, really. I played it through PE and I kind of fell out of love with it.
Okay.
And then weirdly got back into it when I was an adult. And then people are bigger and stronger, so it's a bad time to get back into it, to be honest with you. So I played at college quite a bit and noticed when I was training, like I was having like knee problems, stuff like that. And
it's kind of those little niggles which catch up, won't you, don't you?
And as everyone does, I did the typical thing of I'm going to ignore it and train harder because that's cool.
Because that's really
because that's the manly thing to do. So I kind of butchered it, made it worse, and I thought, right, I'm going to bite the bullet. I went to the GP, and they kind of didn't know anything about it, and I thought, oh well, rest it, ice it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Couple of ibuprofen there, yeah, cool. And then picked up quite a serious injury playing rugby, and I didn't know it was a serious injury until I'd gone to the GP. And this nothing about GPs because they obviously cover a lot of a
and
wide
also it's
scope.
not their speciality,
no,
is
not
it?
At all, not
like
at all.
Any injury, like if a client sort of speaks to me, I'm like, they're fantastic, but it's the last place I would recommend them to go. I would recommend them to go to you or to see a physio or to go down those routes.
Route,
yeah.
So I kind of popped down the GP and my GP was lovely, but she turned around and said, she basically said, oh, I think it's just a strain. Like you've just pulled a muscle. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I'll be fine in a couple of weeks.
And were you in a lot of pain? What was it you did?
So basically I later found out that I tore my QL muscle very slightly, which is very, very rare and very hard to do.
And describe the QL muscle to
So
those who
essentially-
are listening who wouldn't know.
It's a lower back muscle that attaches onto your hip, so it aids in like side flexion. So if you're kind of bending to the side and you can feel a bit of a squeeze, that's kind of your QL muscle, to keep it simple. And I had this massive pain in my lower left back. And it got to a point where it was that inflamed when I sat in a chair. That was the first thing that touched the chair. And I thought, I couldn't get out of bed for a good few days. So I remember calling up my college at the time, being like, I can't come in. I'm
I bet they
completely
thought you were
knackered.
proper fluking.
Well, it was good. My head of year was the head of rugby. So he saw it happen.
Oh, okay. That's okay.
So he knew I wasn't
That's
lying.
right.
So anyway, I decided to do the proper thing and train through it again.
Oh, dear.
And made it worse, and realised that side was just soaking up all of the load in the gym. And I thought, right, now I'm going to go see someone privately. And I went to see a private physio. And, well, he's a sports therapist, actually, funny enough. And originally I went to see him about my knee. And he looked at my back and he was like, what have you done? You know, and it's so funny because I'll always give my clients a hard time. I go, right, what injury history do we have? Are there any kind of big
what's
ones that
going
I
on?
need to know of? And they go, no, nothing. And I'm treating them and you go, oh yeah, I did break this arm a couple of months ago. And I'm like, oh right. Or like, oh yeah, I had a scan and I had a fracture here. And I'm like, you know the bit where I asked you about,
Yeah.
So that was me, essentially. And I went in with a knee problem. And he had a look at my back and he said, I think you've got scoliosis. And I was like, I don't think I do. He said, does it run in your family? I was like, no, I don't know, I'm not sure. And
So that's quite a statement.
Yeah. So anyway, so that muscle was so inflamed and so tight, it was just pulling my hips out of line, and my whole spine was on the kind of wonk. And
you must have been in so much pain.
yeah, it was pretty
I shouldn't
bad.
be laughing.
So hence why my love of unilateral exercises to this day, because it's 90% there, but I think the damage has been done where it's kind of stuck with it. But anyway.
So basically, guys, if you have an injury, go and get it looked at.
Yeah, don't train for it. So loved the process through the physio, and the physio I saw was, really, really good. And I just quite liked that kind of being able to see things that people couldn't see. It's almost like being a bit of a detective for the body. It's kind of like a game of Cluedo.
It's probably really interesting to kind of delve into what you're trying to pick out, and I guess eliminate things that it's not.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I'll go on to kind of later down the line. One of the questions I had on the Instagram poll was what kind of separates a good therapist from someone who's kind of average or poor. And it's kind of just admitting that you're not sure and we're going to trial and error. If you're not sure, it's like, I'm not going to just say, I think it's this, because later down the line you'll probably look like a bit of an idiot, because if they get a scan and go, oh, it turns out this or that, and I've been in that situation. So completely fell in love with the process, and started looking at courses and stuff like this, and it was around COVID time or just before, when I was looking at university courses. And I kind of turned around and I was adamant that I was going to go to uni. That all of my siblings went to uni, and I thought, no, I'm not gonna go to uni. I want to do X, Y, and Z, or I'm going to go PT or be a car salesman or something. That was the joke in my family. I was good at talking, and I probably could sell a lot of things. I don't know, but so went to uni, and then kind of here we are, and I kind of did. The fortunate thing about my university is I got my sports massage qualifications in my first year.
And where was it you went?
So I went to Farnborough Tech, which is, they call it like a sister uni of the Uni of Surrey, so Guildford.
Okay, yeah.
So I originally was looking at Guildford, and they had loads of adverts for Farnborough Tech, and I was like, why is this coming up? And it turned out to be cheaper, and I was living at Farnborough at the time. So I thought, I'll go and see how it is. I was very sceptical, because I was a bit like, it's a college, there'll be college kids.
Yeah, and it was quite new at the time. Like, it's fairly recent.
Yeah, so they had like a university centre bill and all this. So it was like a separate building to the college lot, so you didn't have any like grubby kids running around and all that kind of stuff. But started going there and just completely fell in love with it. Like, it was really, really good. My cohort was really small, had really good relationships with a lot of my lecturers, and some of them who have moved on and left, I'm now friends with on social media and stuff like that. So I've always got that like second opinion and just catching up with them, which is lovely. And it does
kind of like cross over, and I think that with sort of where I am and sort of connecting with you guys, and the people that you work with, the people that you connect with,
100%.
The relationships you make are so important to also come back to, because you can learn so much. And without them, you wouldn't necessarily be in the same position that you are.
100%. So did my time there, 3 years, which went far too quickly. And I kind of started using my sports massage qualification. I just did mobile treatments. So I'd drive to like mates' houses or people through the gym and stuff like that. And word spread, so it would be like the odd kind of like, oh, you went around my friend's house for like a bit of treatment, this, that, and the other. And I was like, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really like money driven. It was just something to do while I was kind of at uni.
And kind of figuring, I guess,
Yeah,
like
this
what
is
you were
it.
kind of planning.
And it was just quite nice because being at uni and having a part-time job in hospitality to kind of make ends meet, I didn't really have the time to fully commit to any kind of like static role in
Big
a job
stuff,
or a place.
yeah.
So it worked out quite well. And it gives you impeccable time management skills. Unpacking, cleaning your bed, driving around, it's an absolute nightmare. So if you're a mobile therapist, I take my hat off to you because it's an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And then, so I worked with a sports therapist for a while, just doing sports massage at the weekends. He basically rented a room from a gym, sort of a private clinic, so to speak, and worked alongside him for close to 3 years, basically my time at uni.
Amazing.
And it was kind of doing every sort of Friday or the odd Sunday.
I guess that like kind of stepping stone to then
yeah,
sort
like
of
just
moving on to your
trickling
own
it in
stuff.
and seeing the same faces. It was quite good, and also kind of learning from him, and it's good to have that kind of second opinion, you know. And that's why I'm so close with some of my lecturers, because I know I can kind of speak to them and be like, not quite sure about this one, or what do you reckon about here, or someone to treat me, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
And then I actually met, obviously some of your viewers will know Justine and Morgan through PAG and being on the podcast. I started treating them at my old workplace, and I spoke to them about wanting to kind of get my own room and kind of progress it, because the physio that I was working with didn't have that capacity.
Yeah.
It was one room. He wasn't there on a Friday or like a Sunday, so I had
it was
2
kind
days
of
to work
filling.
with, which was, it got to a point where I started getting clients asking kind of during the week, and I was like, I can't, you know, it's kind of,
And you want to
tricky.
progress with that anyway, as 100%. It is.
Yeah, so left that kind of job role and had a little chat with John over at PAG, and met all of you guys and kind of looked at the room and
joined the crazy bunch.
Yeah, literally fit right in, and kind of went from there pretty much, and here we are now in a roundabout way, which is good. So,
it's nice to sort of, and I know you sort of work closely with a lot of my team, and sort of having your base, you've got those sort of relations, and also with what we do, it's invaluable to sort of have someone like yourself to be able to sort of also refer to, but have that, because even obviously you've treated me multiple times, which I definitely need to book in again soon. So it's sort of that recovery aspect, I guess, being in a gym environment is second to none.
Yeah, it's funny because, so I work with my rugby team as a physio as well, because the current physio left, and they sort of turned to me and said, do you mind physioing? I was like, yeah. But I'm a sports therapist, not a physio. All the physios get upset. So I work as a physio for a rugby team as well, which is quite nice, because I'll touch a bit on that later. The kind of, one of the questions was a lot of like the most common injuries we see in a gym environment, which is completely different to a sporting team, which is a contact sport, because the list of injuries is very different. It's more kind of traumatic or trauma injuries, you know, so to speak.
Whereas I suppose for sort of in the gym, we look a little bit into sort of tightness and understanding how those joints are sitting and how that alignment and stuff can really sort of have a knock-on effect when training through that. Whereas I guess like an automatic kind of injury is very different in terms of the recovery through that.
Yeah, like it's kind of common in a gym population, because the training stays the same, and it's usually, we'll look at kind of progressive overload. This is your field of work anyway. And something, you know, there's something's increasing, whether that's volume, weight, time over tension or whatever. And we look at what we call like an overuse injury or a chronic sort of like a tendonitis, tendinopathy, those kind of words are thrown around quite a lot. And you see kind of the muscle growing a lot quicker and getting a lot stronger, but the tendon's like, oh, what about me? Can I have a little bit of load?
And I was actually, really funny you say that, because I was explaining this to a client yesterday, because she was sort of saying how sort of sometimes in certain exercises you can sort of feel sort of where your tendons are like, oh, like we're trying to really catch up here. And I was trying to explain that, you know, sometimes, you know, what we can actually handle is way more than our tendons can handle. And so obviously things can chip away over time, sort of not being that aware of it. And obviously, when you look at it in a more extreme scale in terms of bodybuilding,
definitely.
obviously with sort of the recovery agents that assistants can help with, you're constantly recovering, but your tendons are not catching up with the muscle that you've built.
This is it. So a lot of the current literature leans towards kind of blood flow, and your muscle likes to soak up kind of all of that load. And because of the lack of blood supply, but less blood supply, the tendons kind of trying to catch up, but it's not quite there. This is why like deload weeks are really important, and stuff like that. I know a lot of the PTs over at PAG are really switched on with that kind of side
yeah,
of things.
and I didn't really sort of really know how to sort of go into the kind of deload route until sort of being in the job that I am, and I was like, didn't have a clue. When I was first like gym training, I was like, meh, you just kind of train just train all the time, whatever. But actually, you know, working in phases, and obviously for those who haven't heard previous podcasts of how I've spoken about a deload, it's basically essentially where you pull back sort of a recovery week, you chill out on some exercises. There are different formats of how you could run a deload. Some people completely take it off. Some people just reduce the amount of sessions they're doing. Some people still do the same amount of sessions, but obviously less amount of time. You know, you're not sort of pulling back on those sets and those reps and things. So there's different ways, but it's essentially a week for your body to recoup. Sometimes you might only take 2 or 3 days deload. You know, there's so many ways that you can kind of push for it. And obviously having that coach as an outside eye will give you sort of that when it's needed to be implemented. And it's really good to recognize. And I find that most of my mesos work in 6 to 8 week blocks. So that deload week, I always book in with you because it's kind of that extra recovery that I find helps with my training, because then post deload, you can push on just as much.
Of course. I mean, you said it well.
Which is good. I find sometimes you like, especially gym like jargon, I guess, gets thrown around, and probably in the same in your industry.
Yeah,
and loads of people are like, what?
100%.
So it's just that sort of addition to that recovery.
That leads quite nicely into like having a chat, because I got a client of mine. He kind of sees a few different physios just because of what's going on, and he was kind of saying like it's funny seeing how different physios or sports therapists or chiropractors treat very differently, and some will have that approach of a lot of jargon, and they like to be very precise and very kind of bang on it, which is fine. But when you're speaking to someone who's only just kind of, you know, a weekend warriors training or plays a sport. I mean, if I was to speak to some of the rugby lads the way some of these physios speak online and stuff like that, they would just have no clue, absolutely no clue.
And it's hard because you just want to have it being relatable to understand, okay, how are you actually, I just want to know how I'm going to like fix this issue, or over time understand how it's going to recover.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a massive part is kind of the psychology behind it, and a lot of people won't touch upon this, but if I was to sit you down and go, oh, you've got a knee injury, this tendon is really upset, you've got an injury, you think, oh, I'm injured, that's not good.
Yeah.
You know, and it kind of throws a bit of a wobble on people sometimes.
And I think that's such an important thing, and I think especially with doctors, where a lot of that comes into it, and it's like, yes, we want to understand an issue, but actually sometimes by narrowing it down to one point can also scare us and scare people in general. Definitely. Because you then think you've got that for the rest of your life, or that's a real big issue. Yeah,
of course. And I think like having that approach of just implementing it into their training, get as much pain-free motion as possible, stuff like that, trying to not change their day-to-day training schedule or life is really important.
Yeah.
Because there's not that kind of mental block or a complete change in everything, you know.
Yeah, because it does throw us off at the best of times.
Exactly. Like, and it's quite nice kind of having like a few injuries here and there, and it is super like morally, it's really like, not morally, sorry, sort of mentally it's really kind of taxing, and you're used to pushing certain numbers and, you know, certain movements feeling really good, and you're progressing, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can't lift the bar anymore.
Yeah. So and also it's like, you know, you don't want to prolong anything. So with that, even though yes, it is really hard, and I'm saying this because I know if I had an extreme injury of some sort, I would probably cry most days. Anyway, you don't want to prolong that for a longer period of time. Like, you don't want to be out for weeks. You want to make it like a few days or even just 1 week, you know. So just by focusing a little bit more into that recovery side of things, actually your body's gonna thank you so much more mentally as well.
100%.
It's hard to manage injuries. As you know, obviously in PAG, there's a lot of people with injuries. And it's just being aware of your sort of training. And I think sometimes people worry or over worry about things.
Yeah.
And compared to actually understanding and having an awareness of your body. Now, obviously, a lot of the time it's to do with obviously tightness. Now, obviously, in terms of what you do in like sports therapy, is, you know, we want to relieve that tightness. So actually your joints and movement and they can move
100%.
compared to anything else.
It's that kind of, I had a really good, as I said before, like really good lecturers at uni, and one of them, and it always kind of stuck with me, and he was just kind of saying, look at the bigger picture, but don't drown in all of the kind of little details, you know, look at the big picture, but don't pay attention to all of the little details, because you'll see a lot of people going, oh, you know, that toe you broke 4 years ago, that's why your shoulder's knackered now. You think, okay, okay, I buy into it. But don't get me wrong, you know, you do need to look at the big picture and kind of what sports people, all the subjective info, and people think all the questioning, kind of what a session looks like with me is essentially kind of, there'll be a lot of subjective questioning and in regards to sports you've played in the past, how many times you're training, what your sort of training split look like, you know, how much volume are you doing, what previous injuries you do, what you do for work, you know, even.
And for some people, it might not be, they might not even have a strict training program. Like they may not even go, because obviously depending on your lifestyle and your job will depend on a lot of what comes up, I imagine.
Exactly.
And even from my clients that vary entirely in jobs, actually there's so many common things that I see in terms of people working from home and office based. And what comes up with like lower back pain and, you know, your sort of all of that tightness around your traps and sort of being hunched over, it makes such a difference
100%,
for what's going on.
100%. And there is like a really kind of a fine line between training and trying to sort these kind of what we call a pathology or sort of an issue that you've had or something that's chronic or an overuse kind of issue. And there is that fine line between training, fixing kind of what's in your training and having like a balanced, what I like to say a 1-to-1 ratio. And it's really simple. And again, I'll go back to one of my lecturers. If you're pushing something one way this way, you should be pulling something one way this way. And if you look at someone's program and think, unless there's a specific goal, if it's performance related, it might be a different, you know, for example, I don't know, American footballers, they like to push a lot. So they're going to be pushing a lot. There's going to be an imbalance there. People who are boxers or anything like that, they're going to be really kind of internally rotated. And it's a case of, do we actually need to fix that? Is that for performance? If I fix that, will that make them worse in regards to their performance? So it's looking again at that subjective and kind of making sure the average gym goer or person that's training really hard, making sure, you know, if they're pushing something overhead, they're pulling something, and it's that kind of vertical push, vertical pull type thing, you know.
And it's something that I've sort of highlighted so much with my team more recently, is that just sort of allowing them to understand why, like, you know, naturally in our body, you will have imbalances. Like, you know, we've always got that one side, if we were to be pushed, what leg would go forward first? 100%. We've always got, I always use this an example, like if someone was to call you, you'd always turn over one side to the other, like you just will. Now, over time, and now for me, one side of my traps is a little bit more engaged than the other because it's the one, my bag is constantly heaving over my shoulder. I carry everything on that side. Over time, obviously that sort of leads to a lot, and that's where imbalances can show. But equally, as long as it's not sort of impacting things, that's quite normal. And I think people can panic about that.
It's really good you've said that, because again, going about kind of the joke I made earlier about, I had a broken toe years ago and that's why this is all I learned. You get lost in a lot of the little details. You know, if you take a picture of yourself and like, oh, my hips are really wonky, or my shoulder's this way, or my, I don't know, this hand, you know, this shoulder's a bit twisted this way. You know, if it's not giving you pain, why is it an issue? You know, and you could look at the argument of, oh, well, down the line, it might give you an issue. Okay, fine. Well, we can look at correcting it. But if it's not that big of a deal, you know, it's not, you know, that obvious, it's not a big issue.
And also it's then understanding it. Like sometimes, obviously through tightness, we can see those imbalances. Like I always notice in my posing, sometimes when obviously on my right side, which I use all the time, my back, it tends to bunch up onto one side. So, you know, that's something that to understand once I've had a sports massage, sort of focusing with Mike on sort of sort of
release work
ironing
and-
that out, I guess, is probably my favourite sort of way to say it. It then completely changes the game. And that is a lot in, obviously, I know it's a focus in bodybuilding, but a lot of people find that. And, you know, tightness, if you're sat down at your desk or sort of in the office, your glutes are going to get pretty darn tight, which tends to lead, obviously, I've suffered before with a tiny bit of sciatica, but I always know if that comes up, it's because my glutes are tight.
100%.
And over any lower back pain, it's because my glutes are tight. And not enough people are sort of understanding that, you know, oh, my traps are sort of, you know, that's why we need to focus on that posture, which is where the pushing and pulling comes into it. 100%. So you're targeting sort of your training. And obviously if you have a coach, they should sort of know in how we sort of program that, and that you kind of want to tick everything in that.
Definitely.
Which is
that's a sign of a good coach.
Yeah. And it is, you probably get people come to you with sort of then instantly kind of knowing of how that can kind of come about, and sort of what's the kind of work that you explain most to people with sort of just common injuries across the board, not necessarily gym specific.
Yeah, like I would say the most common, but there's two and they're pretty 50-50. It will be that like thoracic tightness, lower trap behind your shoulder blades, that kind of pain. Because
that always feels the nicest when someone's like,
yeah, it depends how sore it is.
Yeah.
Oh, some of my clients, they hate it.
Yeah.
That, and then again, what you've briefly touched upon with just lower back pain. And I use the word pain quite loosely because I think a lot of people, as soon as, I think not the gym population, but a lot of the general population will feel a twinge or a bit of a buzz or something go in their lower back and they think, oh, I've herniated a disc or this, I've got sciatica, I've got this, I've got that. And, you know, and I think there's still a lot of poor information out there online. A lot of kind of these, I call them cereal box PTs or cereal box therapists, I always make that joke, who kind of are giving a lot of misinformation about lower back issues and how to correct them and stuff like that. And again, return to basics, you know, focus on kind of your glute work and glute bridges and stuff like this, and really strengthen that post chain up. And
because it's going to strengthen all around your hips and everything as well. And I think people panic with the lower back side of things because, you know, especially in gym training, you know, your lower back might just start engaging. It might just be getting some blood flow. And I find this after a hefty leg day, my lower back's like, ooh, no, I'm not in pain. That's just it firing up because it's trying to help me move whatever weight I'm doing compared to every other muscle in my body, which I've just killed. So it's actually understanding the difference with, are we in actual pain or is it just sort of your muscles letting you know they're there?
And it's also like a big fear. And that's, again, talking about really common injuries, especially with lower back stuff. Most people will have a fear of doing the same movement they've done that caused that issue. So let's say it would be something similar. Like I've dropped a bit of paper, I go to pick that up. Ow, I've done something. Every time I go to pick something up, I then squat or I'm doing it really awkwardly and I'm making it so much worse. And it's just retraining your body to kind of work on that hip hinge and actually working properly. A lot of people that will, I say, oh, I don't deadlift anymore, I won't RDL anymore because it's not good for your lower back, stuff like that. That's just out of fear because that's how they've initially injured something where there's been a weakness or a tightness. That's where it's happened.
Probably even more so an encouragement to strengthen those exercises more than anything else.
I love using the analogy, and whenever someone has like a back issue, especially lower back or anything, there's a massive kind of view online that your back stiff is strong, right? We like it really neutral, really straight when we're hinging and when we're kind of RDLing. You know, your spine's not a broomstick. I love saying this. Do you remember those toys when you're younger, the snake? And you can hold it at the bottom and it all kind of moves like that and you can kind of throw them around and whatnot. You've got, you know, so many different little vertebrae and they work like that. And there's movement there and you need to get it moving, because if you don't get it moving, the next time you move that with load, you're probably going to injure yourself.
Yeah.
You know?
And there is something I actually read the other day sort of about that sort of neutral spine thing. And yes, obviously there are exercises that we need to like obviously ensure we've got a neutral spine and it's going to ensure that the movement's the most powerful, blah, blah, blah. However, obviously it does need to move in more than one plane of motion and just keeping it flexible and mobile. And obviously when we look at sort of sports therapy and getting massages and focusing on recovery, it's going to increase that mobility a lot more. So I'm not the best person in terms of stretching and keeping it up. And I know, to be honest, a lot of people aren't. A lot of people say the same. And, you know, for me, it is imperative that I book every sort of 6 to 8 weeks with a sports massage, because I know there are other things that I need to improve on keeping in my program. So it's just kind of being aware of sort of that your body we need to feel mobile, because most people aren't. We get to a certain age, or, you know, obviously not now, but like, you know, my parents, you know, get up, oh, I'm stiff. Oh, it's because I'm getting old. Like, you can do stuff about that as well. And I think people are just like, oh, yeah, that's it. That's me out for the rest of my life. Like, I'm just going to have a bad back, or I'm going to be stiff, or I'm going to be, no, you don't have to be. You will be able to get up and off the floor.
Yeah, obviously this is quite rich coming from me because I'm fairly young, but you don't get old. Sorry, you don't stop moving because you get old. You get old because you stop moving.
Yeah.
Like that's a prime example. And like I look at my grandparents now, my nan's like, oh, I don't want to leave the living room. You know, she loves her comfort. And she wonders why like walking's such a chore now and stuff. And, you know, you think like, yeah, because you don't go anywhere, you don't do anything. And yes, it's going to be hard as you get older.
Yeah, 100%.
You've just got little bits daily, you know, and movement is king. Like, you have to keep moving. And it will touch upon one of the questions, which I'm sure we'll go on towards the end, was kind of, besides sleep, what would you prioritize for recovery? And I don't know if I'll spoil it now.
Yeah, go for it. It leads us nicely
like,
onto the Q&A side of things.
Yeah, it's movement. Like, movement is such an underrated, and I know it's quite a cheap thing to say, but as much pain-free movement as you can, you know, just because some of the guys at rugby, right, that say, I've got a knee injury or I've had an ankle surgery, stuff like that. Well, why can't we move upper body? Why can't we get on an arm crank or a bike, you know, an arm bike or a watt bike, get moving, get sweating.
Or even do some upper body exercises.
Exactly that, you know, why have you stopped training entirely? There's no point. You're going to lose all your upper body. And most
unless your
train upper body
anyway. Yeah. And it's so true that sort of as soon as you sort of stop to use stuff, things will get stiffer, things will get harder. And I actually have quite a few of my clients who have come to me sort of being a little bit older, and they're like, I need to be stronger. Yeah. Now, one of my clients, she sort of suffered with hugely, sort of had frozen shoulder. And she was so fearful, even post being signed off from physio, so fearful of doing anything that it was causing pain. Now she's pressing, she's hella strong, she's doing press up, like nothing is causing her pain. But it's also, I think, also been in that confidence that actually you can move and you can sort of rehab into things, having physio, having rehab. After you do a lot of rehab stuff as well. It's so important, and that you can build the strength around that. So actually that's never, most likely, hopefully never going to be a problem again.
100%. And yeah, again, it's that fear factor. You've got to be positive. Like, you have to be positive in the whole thing. And just touching on what you said earlier, using myself as a bit of a case study, like the most times I would pick up little niggles or injuries through rugby, I noticed that I would stop training as much. And I use that as an excuse of, oh, I've got a game on Saturday. I want to be fresh for the game, so I'm not going to train Thursday or Friday. And it was like, well, why not? Why not train? But you don't have to, you know, go absolutely to town and train. I'm so sore, you know. But I found when I was moving, you know, a lot more, just almost doing like a full body thing before a game, like on a Friday, just moving it, getting it kind of oiled up, moving, you know, kind of getting that sort of motion there and a bit of a loaded stretch.
Actually, you probably feel fresher.
Yeah, like I'd have like a blinder of a game, and I'm not that good of a rugby player anyway.
And move more than anything else. Full stop. Yeah, just that's it. That's all we need to speak about. And you know, so many people are like, when they have injuries, just fully stop. Yeah. Like we should be thinking about how we can recover quicker is going to be by moving. No, we're not saying like, you know, do some major extreme stuff. But obviously in the rehab side of things that you do, when you work with a client, how would you kind of navigate that to give them sort of the information post massage? Because, you know, you kind of, I guess, get this consultation, work on the area that's needed for them, and then sort of from there.
Yeah, of course. It's quite subjective, so it's down to the injury. But as a blanket term, like generally speaking, we'll look at kind of pain management strategies first. And I'll always resort to kind of carry on what you're doing. Let me know what's hurting, let me know what's not hurting. And whatever's not hurting, we're going to carry on doing.
Yeah, and communicate it as much as possible.
Exactly that. And a lot of people are quite shocked. They're like, oh, so I can train. it's like, well, yeah, of course you can.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
that's not giving you any problems, fine.
Yeah.
You know, let's say, I don't know, you've got a shoulder problem. It's like, it's only overhead press that's causing me an issue, but I can do a flat press or whatever.
Cool. Just avoid what is causing you pain.
Let's do it.
Yep.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
And obviously that's quite easy with a quite a minor injury, but you know, they are workarounds. I use myself as an example, a bit selfish, but easy to talk about. It was only a small tear in a rotator cuff on my left shoulder playing rugby. And I went from pressing a pretty impressive amount of weight, don't worry, to not even being able to bench press a bar. Literally, like, I couldn't bench press a bar. And it was kind of like, right, well, what can I do? And just experimenting and a bit of like pronated pressing stuff. I was like, oh, that feels okay. Let's start loading that up. Let's get some movement in there. Let's get some blood in there and working through it that way. And it is trial and error.
And not causing it pain, but actually pushing strength through it.
And don't get me wrong, like a little bit of pain is good. Like most people will come to me and go, oh, how many reps do I need to do on this? Or how many sets do I need to do on this? And I'm a massive fan of working off of a pain scale. So we say, right, I've got a tricep tendinopathy, right? And it's giving me pain, and I'm going to do some isometric holds or whatever, get all fancy on you. As long as that pain's kind of sitting between that sort of 3 and 5 out of 10, if it starts creeping on a 5, we'll kind of call it off. And let's say you came to me and you said, yeah, my tricep's been really a bit of a pain in the backside. I need to rehab it. What do you want me to do? You know, how long do you want me to do it for? I'll go, as long as you want, do it before you're training. Yeah. And at the moment it starts to creep up on pain, that's when we know it's had enough and we can then go and train. Cool. Done.
Amazing.
Easy.
And it's sort of also, I guess, that little bit of common sense sort of around stuff. Like I always say to my clients, okay, cool. Anything's aggravated by that, we sort of avoid. But ultimately, we still want to be moving or getting movement through that muscle group or that area or wherever sort of you're looking at. And, you know, I've worked with clients who have had previous Achilles ruptures. Obviously, I'm always sort of post-physio sign-off anyway. Yeah, cool. But a lot of people come to strengthen around that because it's so important, because they don't want it to happen again. And it is really important. And, you know, the sort of how would you say for sort of what you do, a lot of people, I guess, come to you and be like, I'm fixed, you know, which is obviously, you know, it doesn't happen like that
overnight.
So it's hard because a lot of sports massage is a little bit more painful. Again, you're not there to butcher someone, which I think is a massive misconception. Yeah,
I think a lot of people see online the kind of people getting absolutely hounded, like, and they're in so much pain, and it's a case of psychologically it's not very nice.
Yeah, like, and you don't want to be in that much pain. Like, yes, we know a bit of discomfort. It's tight. It's going to be a bit.
Exactly that. And again, like, I always say that first session, if you've never had any kind of sports massage work done or any like deep tissue work, that first session you have done is always going to be the worst. I use that word loosely.
And you always feel like a bit disturbed afterwards before it then fully relaxes off, because it does take a little bit of time.
And I think a lot of my clients will kind of, they view it as if like it's no different from hurting at the gym. It's rewarding because they know there's an end goal and they know there's a result from it, which is quite good. Yeah, because you don't want to be like stuck like really tight. You know, you want it. The Tin Man.
Yeah. You want to sort of have that mobility and flexibility within it. But yeah, it is quite a satisfying sort of thing. But also, you know, it's very different to like what I would say a spa massage that's like there to just
wax
relax
on, wax
you.
off.
Yeah. Like you're not sort of going to you for, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like you need to be able to feel what's working.
It's accurate. It's kind of like, right, X, Y, and Z, this is what's wrong. This is what we're going to do. We're done. Cool. Happy days. Buzzing. Yeah. It's not kind of, you know, light a candle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Here you go. Let's go then.
You know,
yeah.
I go as far as have a nice plant in my room with a nice room scent.
There you go. That's fine.
This is it.
And obviously we did reach out to both our followers. Mine were a little bit rubbish for any questions for you, Mike, but I know you had quite a few to delve into. Now, obviously we've spoken about sort of one already with sort of the most common injuries. And what would you say, we've gone into past the sleep
sure.
words. Obviously the top 3 best recovery things. Obviously sleep is a no-brainer. Yeah, and if you're not recovering, you're probably not sleeping well.
Yeah, and just touching on that, and then I'll kind of go into my top 3.
Let's go. Yeah.
9 times out of 10, when people have had a rubbish training session, they've pulled a muscle, had a little niggle, 9 times out of 10 they go, yeah, I had a bit of a poor sleep beforehand. And you go, right, there you go.
It's the first thing. If I have a bad sleep, I get nervous for my training session. And I say to people, like, if you're not sleeping, you're not going to be growing. Like, that's my view as well. 100%. And obviously, again, I'm thinking of it more in terms of my goals in bodybuilding.
Yeah, like
but if I'm not
hypertrophy,
sleeping, I'm not. My body's not happy. I'm not going to grow.
Yeah, so recovery is that S tier. You cannot kind of sleep, not recovery. Sleep is that top tier. You cannot dethrone it. That is the king. Next, I would say it's range of motion or movement, just moving.
Yeah,
that has to be. It's up there. You know, it's got to be. Those two are kind of your priorities. Then you could kind of look at. It's difficult because each injury is different. So let's say we've got a lot of inflammation. Then we could look at. There's a lot of literature now looking into cold water therapy and stuff like that. Now, when I had my shoulder, that was a bit of a godsend.
Yeah.
So I'm always going to be. I'm a bit biased, but there's
especially with your own experiences. I see all the benefits of sort of cold water therapy, and I pass because getting into an ice bath. I think I've done it once or twice.
Yeah.
Getting into a plunge pool, and I was literally like, "This ain't for me."
And there's levels to it. Like, I was fortunate when I was at uni. One of the girls, shout out Tamsin, she worked at David Lloyd, and they had a plunge pool, which was great. So she could get us in, and it was hell. Like, it was awful, but it was good fun. Like, it was really good. But I always say to my clients, people think cold water therapy, they think of a frozen over chest freezer, smashing it up, jumping in at 5 o'clock in the morning, which is minging.
Yeah.
I used to have a hot shower, and at the end of my shower, I would just have the shower head on this shoulder, blast it on cold water for a minute, and I'd kind of just hide away from the rest of the cold water and just numb that area and just try and get rid of that inflammation, because there's some decent literature out there.
I guess it's kind of coming from that same like ice.
Yeah, as long as it's cold enough. I can't remember the actual figure, but it doesn't have to be ice. As long as it's cold.
But I guess it's coming sort of from that, where that's all evolved from, and people have sort of using cold water. And it is fantastic. And I know some of my clients, they all love the open water swimming as well.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, wow, incredible.
I did that once and got humbled. Realised how rubbish I am at swimming. It's been a while.
But there are so many different recovery aspects. And obviously by speaking to sort of professionals and speaking to people who are more specialised than the doctor, like if you go to the doctor with sort of one lower back pain, they're probably just going to give you some sort of medication. Like, they're not really going to go, oh, yeah, your glutes are really tight, I would expect. Like, that's not their job. Like, you know, in general,
exactly.
You know, you want it to come from sort of people that have been referred to. If you have a coach, obviously understanding where they will have a referral as well. Because I know a lot of my clients have been to see you. And it's just having that confidence coming away from it, not thinking you're suddenly just going to be fixed, but actually doing all of these different aspects, which can help for that as well.
Well, the way I always say it is you kind of put it this way. When you go see your GP or a doctor, or, you know, you go to A&E, half the time you're speaking to them sat in a chair and they won't actually get you up. And it's one of those things of how the hell do they kind of assess you in regards to movement and stuff. And it's just, you know, that's not me knocking them. It's just there are remits and there are kind of specialities. And it's like someone that say, you know, if you break your bone, you're not going to come to me.
Yeah.
I haven't got an X-ray machine.
Yeah, that's not my job.
You know, so it's just about accepting like where you're comfortable to work in and having that kind of pride to go, actually, I'm going to refer you. And there's been cases where I've had clients and I've gone, I've done all I can and I've had a look. I think we should get a scan. I think we should go see a chiro. I think we should go see an osteopath, something like that. And it's
because they each have their...
You have to work in this lovely little triangle. Otherwise, it's kind of... It can't be kind of, oh, you're poaching clients, this, that and the other. It has to... You have to... The client comes first.
You have to work with people. Yeah, ultimately.
First,
And that is really, really important to highlight. And it's the same with sort of me, with my clients who have any niggles. Obviously, there's navigation that I can give them, understanding of sort of muscle and any injuries that I've previously had or stuff that I've worked with you and understanding that. But equally, I can go, there are some avenues that I can give you, but I'm not a specialist. I'm not diagnosing you. I would go here for that.
Yeah, the option's there. And it's,
100%. And it's sort of having that knowledge behind that more than anything else.
Definitely.
And obviously you had a couple of other questions into things.
Yeah, so obviously I briefly touched upon common issues in the
Yes.
gym, but I never really spoke about injuries. So I'll tell you what I'll do. Really common injuries in rugby, just because that's where I work.
Yeah.
And then I'll do really common injuries in a gym environment. So especially at PAG. So if any of you are listening, you find this quite funny. The most common injuries, so to speak, that I see at PAG are rotator cuff strains or very small tears, which can be as simple of, they can be quite insidious. They can come around kind of randomly.
Yeah.
It could be something where you're shoulder pressing and you're a bit too strict and you're behind your head and it's just putting strain on that cuff.
Yeah.
It's just not very happy, or one of four. Or it's a lot of tendinopathies. So you hear the kind of phrase tennis elbow and golfer's elbow.
Yep.
They are very common in people that weight train and weight lift a lot. They are just very common, especially at PAG.
Yeah.
And then moving on to rugby, at the moment, I mean, I could go all over the place, but this season, AC joint dysfunction, so without sounding too fancy, essentially, where your collarbone meets your kind of, it's called your acromioclavicular joint.
All
So
the
I
words.
almost messed that up.
Yeah.
There's a little ligament that sits in there, and if you feel my left shoulder, it's nice and bony because I've done mine. That can be from impact from that shoulder. As the joint goes like that, the ligament's very unhappy, as you can imagine. That and just concussions, to be honest with you. I think those are the most common
And
ones
sort
at
of
the
how
moment.
do you delve into that side of things?
Concussions?
Yeah.
It's that's a whole can of worms, to be honest with you. If you look at any rugby fans out there, know that the RFU are pretty pants. So the governing body for rugby, or England Rugby, their concussion protocol, this will kind of make your eyebrows raise. The current ruling is 21 days. So if you go play again rugby, bang your head or get knocked out or whatever, you can resume training and playing after 21 days, which is a little bit alarming because there's a lot of literature out there now that talks about
severity.
brain health, and they're now talking about 12 months to 18 months for your brain to fully heal from kind of repetitive
So
kind of
21 days. It's,
concussions. So yeah,
two different
it's
sides of the spectrum.
yeah, and again, we talk about going off literature and then experience, and it's kind of where do you take that, you know?
And it's having that evidence more than anything else.
Exactly that. So yeah, it's tricky. Very tricky.
Completely different ones. And I think a lot of people with shoulders, rotator cuffs is probably one of the ones that I mostly people say to me about, that and lower back.
Yeah.
Just as a given. And a lot of people, more so on my team at the moment, I've got quite a lot of runners. I don't know how I've done this because
running's blowing up.
It's just going crazy.
Everyone runs.
But, you know, it's that understanding of impact. And actually, a lot of my runners' posterior chains are non-existent. So when you're looking at posterior chains, we're talking about glutes, hamstrings, calves, everything sort of behind you. And their glutes are dormant. And so a lot of that in terms of PTing and with along the side of stuff that you do, it's sort of working to sort of bring that up as well.
Yeah, that is a really common issue. And I think with the rise of run clubs and just that popularity, I don't even know where it came from. It kind of just blew up. But the whole thing of running, your body is always fighting to be as efficient as possible. It wants to use as little as you're aiming to use as little oxygen as possible. So you're as efficient as possible so you can run faster for longer. Now, if that means switching off certain muscle groups and trying to make yourself more efficient, then that's what's going to happen. That's my view on it.
It's a really, really good explanation of it.
Yeah,
actually.
it's quite common, and that doesn't mean it's an issue. Like, again, it's going back to that sound treating a boxer and his shoulders are really internally rotated or whatever. Ankle mobility in runners is usually pretty poor. Do you need to fix it if all they do is solely run? Not really. Like, that is not really the case.
Yeah.
You know, if someone's a marathon runner and they're taking it really, really seriously and they're chasing numbers and really pushing it, I don't want to be the person that takes that away from them by saying, well, you've got really poor ankle mobility, you can't squat. Well, why does that person need to squat? You know, it's kind of that.
Obviously, as long as we're not in pain and we've got strength around that ankle for it to be supported.
Exactly that.
Then.
Yeah, and this is why, like what we said at the start of the podcast, kind of looking at the bigger picture, but not all the fine details.
Yeah.
You know, I don't need to see a bum to the floor squatting a runner because, you know, if they're not getting any issues or any pain, that's their role, it's their job,
Yeah.
you know? So,
And it's really important to recognize that sort of within sort of if you're listening with your individual lifestyle and your individual sport, because it is so specific.
Yeah.
But equally, obviously, working sort of everything around sort of in the gym and working a bit of everything is still pretty important
100%.
to do so that things don't become as dormant, because that's when injuries can come further down the line, and sort of where misalignment can come from too. So yeah, a really interesting one.
I mean, yeah, it's again, and I might be eating my words in a couple of months and new literature comes out, this, that and the other, and it's just a game of staying on top of what's kind of current in the media and what's going on.
And also with your clients themselves.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think just being honest and having that good rapport, like it's no different if you're a PT. Any client-facing role, you've got to have good rapport with your clients. Otherwise, there's not that trust there. You have to have that trust there, and that way, if you are wrong, or you know, we're all human, we can get it wrong. You know that you're going to do the right thing to correct it.
And it's the communication at each point.
100%.
Like it's okay. This is that. Oh, yeah, I'm now experiencing this.
how
the
you get it across,
communication
yeah.
is everything, because then, you know, that's the best way that it's going to be improved on.
Definitely.
Which is nice. And I think that sums things nicely up, which has been awesome. And it's really cool to go into so much detail with injury and recovery and rehab, and actually just the general common knowledge, because I think a lot of people, we do panic and, you know, we don't want to be in pain and we don't want to be uncomfortable. So actually it's just having that sort of understanding of all of these different things that can come about. So yeah, thank you so
Pleasure
much
being
for
on.
coming on. And obviously, if you guys have any questions for Mike or I, obviously delving into Mike's speciality with this topic, then I will communicate all the links underneath on the video, and you'll be able to find that, and I'm sure he will post about the podcast as well. So we are always here, and if you have anything for Mike to come back on, then do let either of us know. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, and hopefully I shall see you on the next episode as well. A big thank you for joining me on my channel and tuning in. Find me on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, Amazon and YouTube, A Diary to Empower. Follow me on Instagram, m_power.fitness, and TikTok, m.ibert. See you on the next episode.